Welcome, 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 everyone. This is our second Think Table of the year, our second and final. We will be talking a little bit about community schools today. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Maisha Rice. I am the Advancement Manager at Alliance San Diego. Alliance San Diego is a community organization that builds collective power to create an inclusive democracy. We have been going and doing this work for about 15 years, and we plan to keep moving and keep pushing through. Today, we are going to spend an hour and a half or so talking about community schools, how Alliance San Diego got involved, what we've been doing to bring it to San Diego, and what we foresee happening in the future. Before we jump into the discussion, I just want to share that we will be taking questions from audience members, whether you decide to raise your hand and verbalize your question, or you want to type it in the chat for me to verbalize. We will open the room up after the discussion between our panelists. We have three amazing speakers, and I will let Farah introduce those. But for now, I will mute myself and handle the chat. If you have any questions, please put them there. If you want me to hang on to your question, please put that in the chat as well. But for now, I'm going to pass it to Farah, who is my colleague at Alliance San Diego. Farah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am Farah Dinga. I am the advancement organizer here at Alliance San Diego, and I am also a local educator, and I have the immense pleasure of being our moderator for tonight's Think Table. So first things first, let's meet our lovely, lovely panel, our lovely speakers. I'm going to start off with Jonathan. If you will introduce yourself and share, why are you taking on this endeavor? What got you involved? What your inspiration kind of was, and what got you invested in this work?
Thank you for that. My name is Jonathan Mello. I'm an organizer with the San Diego Education Association, more commonly referred to as the Teachers Union here in San Diego. And I feel honored and privileged to be here in this space with all of you, and especially with the Alliance crew. I've, over the years, learned so much working with y'all, doing deep organizing and real engagement. So I've been working with educators a little over 10 years now, and though other districts in other parts of the state and the country have been kind of paving the way and experimenting with and kind of building the case for transformative community schools, I think here in San Diego, it's not a stretch to say where we are now can be traced directly back to conversations that educators and parents and community members were having, facilitated in part by Alliance just about that period of time 10 years ago. On curbsides in front of schools, how's it going at your school? What's your experience like? What are the things you want to see? What's the school of your dreams? And so I know we'll talk about that more today, but I think part of the reason that we're engaged in this work as a coalition across San Diego is directly tied to those conversations, that deep engagement, and the discussions that have been evolving and happening between educators and community, parents and students over the years. Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. And I'm going to pop it on over to Alex. Same questions, what got you involved in this work, and what is your inspiration behind it?
Of course. Well, hello, my name is Alexandra Mondragon, or informally Alex. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a senior at San Diego High School. I just turned 18, but I've been doing social advocacy for about as long as I can remember. Primarily, my reason for being a part of the community schools implementation team comes from my involvement with student mental health. I am co-chair of the SWARE Committee, which stands for Student Wellness, Education, and Resources. And they're a branch of the district that is completely student-founded, student-led, and student-run. And it is involved with creating policies and maintaining the social well-being and emotional well-being of students on San Diego Unified School District campuses. And so I was recruited to come onto the community schools team to share my advice, wisdom, and resources from my time working with mental health.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, we have the lovely Chris. If you want to introduce yourself, my friend, same question. Why are you taking on this endeavor? What got you involved and what keeps you keeping on?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. So glad you all could join us. My name is Christopher Rice Wilson. I'm the Associate Director at Alliance San Diego. And I've been working on community schools, I don't know, gosh, I want to say 10 years now. I think I was first approached regarding the concept of community schools by the person sitting next to me, Jonathan. And we've seen, community schools in some form, shape, form, or another carry across superintendents and many board members being elected and unelected. Community schools for me represents the best hope for bridging the gap between community and schools. We did curbside interviews with parents a decade ago. And the number one thing that parents said was that they didn't feel welcome at their school, at their kids' school. And from that moment on, I felt compelled to do work that built a bridge between disconnected parents, disadvantaged students, and a district that was headed in the wrong direction. Community schools represents the opportunity to return schools back to the place that they held in the community when I was in elementary school. At my school, you could get dental screenings, you could get medical screenings, you could get after school curriculum, you could do after school sports. The school was a hub, and not just for students. It wasn't just a building where students attended to learn. It was the center of our community, where they had community meetings. Again, they did medical and dental screenings. Like, it was a place you could go to get resources and help. And over the last question mark years, because I don't want to age myself, schools have changed and their position in the community has changed. And, back then, parents felt welcome and they felt a part of the school and education community. And I think if we really want to get our schools back on track and we really want to talk about educating the whole child, we have to return schools to the place in the community that they held before, which was being the hub, the center. And that's what keeps me involved. And what inspires me to stay involved in community schools is seeing that while we have, made some gains in closing the opportunity gap for marginalized students, we really still have not caught up. We haven't still provided across the board opportunity for all students in our public school system. And we really need to get there, and we need to get there fast.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing your experience with your schooling as well. I think that that's really helpful. And that's actually a great jumping off point as well for my next question, which is, some of us might not know what a community school does or what it is. So what is the difference between public and charter schools? And what is a community school, to get everybody on the same page? Does anybody feel particularly called to answer this question?
Happy to take a
Thank you. Yeah.
crack. And Chris, we all know you're 27, so just stop trying to hide it. So I think Chris talked about it or sort of set the stage in a beautiful way in terms of talking about that reclamation or that bridge between the community and the school. And I think that's really at its core is, over time, separation and walls and barriers form between schools, which geographically often are literally physically in the heart of their community, and through lots of different for lots of different reasons, and political ones, reasons of budget, and over time, perhaps a waning moral commitment to the commons, to the public, and public schools as part of it. And so community schools, people started having essentially variations of that same conversation that Alliance was having with folks on the curbside, which is, what are your dreams and hopes for your child? And connecting that back to this place where they're going to spend so many hours, weeks, months, and years. And then asking, okay, well, how do you bridge the gap between what is and the vision for what could be? And that, over time, educators, community members, parents experimenting, bumbling around in the dark, came up with some things that might not actually appear that astounding or radical when you actually think about them. So reconnecting, if I'm spending so much time in my school, doesn't it make sense that I might have access to some of those very services that Chris talked about? And so, this is a place, a building where students receive often, 2 or 3 of their meals every day and spend a lot of time. So the ability to have services connected from the community back into the school, to a place where there's strong, culturally relevant curriculum, high quality teaching, so where the teachers are supported. And I'm sure at some point we'll talk about all of the 6 pillars, but really at its core, it's that that reclamation of the relationship between schools and communities, and seeing how the resources that are available to us in our community but aren't being connected, tied together, organized, can be brought into the schools. Because in part, our political infrastructure, which is responsible for funding our schools, that commitment of the body politic of the taxpaying public on the question of public education, it does wax and wane. But our students are still going to be going to school every day, every 4 years, regardless of who's in power, regardless of which party's in power. And how do you create systems that can maintain some type of stable commitment between the community and the school, regardless of that kind of ebb and flow? And so, and I think also at their core, they're collaborative as opposed to competitive. There was a big, great idea from people who never spent any time in public schools, mostly in Washington or in the halls of power, who thought, maybe if we inject market competition into our schools, that's going to create innovation and disruption. And it certainly did disrupt things, but it didn't innovate much. And so collaborative as opposed to competitive, bottom up as opposed to top down, restorative as opposed to no excuses and punitive. And so kind of inverting some of what became, bipartisan, a bipartisan commitment to, things like No Child Left Behind, which really strip mine resources, not just out of schools, but out of communities, and finding a way to turn the tide on this now. If you think starting in the 80s or so, multi-decade endeavor to really pull resources, not just out of schools, but out of the communities that those schools live within. So I'm going to be quiet. That's too much, Jonathan. But yeah, I think a big one for me is bottom up, collaborative, and not top down and competitive.
I'd like to chime in.
Feel free. Yes, please.
Because I think you asked a question about the distinction. What's the difference between a public school, a charter school, and a community school? I would say, first of all, a community school is a public school. And I would say a charter school is also a public school. However, charter schools are created to provide innovation and programming that was different than public schools, yet achieve the same outcomes. Community schools, what makes them different, a different public school, is that they adhere to a number of pillars, which is a paradigm shift for public schooling. And Jonathan mentioned a couple of them. I want to go through all of them. They have a strong and proven culturally relevant curriculum, which means it's not one size fits all. They have the space and the ability to create a curriculum for the students that they are serving that might be completely different than the curriculum you find at another public school. They have high quality teaching and learning.
meaning the teachers are provided with supports and opportunities to improve in their fields of study or fields of teaching, outside of district, requirements or opportunities. The thing that's most important to me is the inclusive leadership. So at a public school, you'll have a principal, and that principal is the responsible party on campus for all things and makes decisions for all things from a very Eurocentric leadership position. Where at a charter school, you might have a director or an executive director or a teaching mentor or whatever title the head person at the school is given. They are similar to a principal in that they make all the decisions for the school. At a community school, you have a collaborative leadership model where the principal works with the school site coordinator, and they both work with some sort of inclusive governance team made up of all stakeholders of the school. Teachers, students, parents, community members can serve on this governance team, and they all work together to lead the school to success. So it's not, a one person at the top and everybody else takes direction from that one person. It's a very inclusive leadership model. The fourth pillar is positive behavior practices, including restorative justice. So the focus is not necessarily on zero tolerance or, expulsions and suspensions as a disciplinary model. It's centered on what do the students and the community need in terms of how we create positive behavior in our community, not just at the school. And then there's also family and community partnerships that play a role in the success of the school. The governance team's job is to identify problems and come up with solutions. And the pool from which they can draw the solutions is broader than what you would find at a district school, because they are in partnership with the community, with parents, with business, and a host of other public services to offer those things that are needed to resolve the problems and the issues that the school finds important. And then last is coordinated and integrated wraparound supports, not just for students, for the community. So it's community support services, because what we have to remember is these students are in school for 8, let's say 9 hours a day sometimes, but they go home to a community that's in need most times. And if we're not responding to the needs that are outside of the school, then we're not even able to talk about educating a whole child. I did poetry workshops in public schools for about 5 or 6 years. And we would get a lot of resistance because we weren't certificated and we didn't have teaching credentials and we didn't have liberal arts degrees. And, I told one teacher who was opposed to us being in her classroom, I said, listen, you get this student and you have this student for 8 hours a day, and you don't understand why their homework's not done. You don't understand why they are late every day. You don't understand why they never bring a lunch or why they never eat lunch. Having me in your school can open up your window to what's going on outside of the school. And then you can understand that this 9-year-old child has to go home and help take care of their 4 and 5-year-old brother or sister. They have to do chores, they have to cook dinner, they have to do all these things that get in the way of homework. Or you might find that this student is homeless through their poetry. So the wraparound support services are necessary for teachers, for schools to understand the complete impact of what's happening to the student outside of the school. And so I wanted to share those pillars because many people will tell you they're a community school and they know nothing about the pillars they go into making a successful community school. They'll say, oh, we already have that. And you say, oh, what are your pillars? And they say, what do you mean? And so that is the biggest distinction for me between a community school and a district public school or district charter school.
Thank you so much for making that distinction. I think that is super helpful. As an educator myself, I can say 110%. You never know what's going on in a student's life and what adds up to their performance in a class. And what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that this is a much more holistic way of teaching and of education, that we're caring about the student holistically in all aspects of their life, and teachers and community members and parents. And that also we're taking a lot more equity into care. We're meeting people where they're at and trying to find ways to supplement and to support them regardless of where they're at, that we're not treating everyone as if they're all coming into the classroom with the same experiences, with the same knowledge, with the same things. I think that that's wonderful. Alex, did you have anything you wanted to add on this?
They totally snatched up everything I was going to say. And they did it so well, eloquently. I think the only thing that I would add is definitely, since community schools are located in communities of need, specifically communities that have not been able to obtain specific resources in the past through charter and public schools, I think that the necessity for community schools really comes deep down from the accessibility of those resources, whether they be mental health or opportunities outside of school, extracurriculars, ways to engage student interest. And I think that's what community schools really, really thrives in, and allows for students who have a public school or a charter school education. That's the difference. There's a difference between lack of opportunity and accessibility to resources between those different schools. And I think community schools does a good job of using all of their pillars and community support to achieve all of those things.
Thank you so much. And so this brings us to our next question, which is, can any student attend? Will all schools be converted to community schools? What do we see the future of education being in terms of community school?
I think Kristen, do you want to start us off on that?
Well, sure. I just took my AirPod because it was malfunctioning. I think yes. Community schools, as I envision them, as we've advocated at the district for community schools, would be open to students and families and residents and stakeholders. There would be no application process. There would be no need for picking the cherries off the top of the sundae. Meaning, what some schools do is they cherry pick the students and they take the best students in and they leave the students that present challenges out. It would be a community school. You can't be a community school and then not allow community members into your school. In terms of the future of education, it would be a dream to have every school converted to be a community school, meaning, they buy into the pillars, they establish the leadership practices, they establish the community rapport and relationships necessary for success. That I think, if we were able to do that, we'd have a completely different educational system and we'd have different outcomes. We wouldn't see the large opportunity gaps. For those on the call who don't know, the opportunity gaps are a new way of saying achievement gaps. And we would be educating the whole child across the board, providing the opportunity for all students to reach their fullest potential. I think that's the goal of Alliance San Diego. I think that's a dream of mine. And hopefully we maintain the support necessary to continue transitioning schools into community schools in San Diego Unified School District, and then spread that to the county and then the state.
Thank you. And Jonathan, did you have something to add for that?
I think Chris really spoke to it. And I don't know how deep we'll get into like the kind of strategy as it exists right now, but there's, I think if any of us could create the conditions for all schools to be community schools tomorrow, we would do it, right? We wouldn't hesitate. At the same time, as organizers committed to deep organizing and to for lack of a better term, winning, to really building power in the community. We can feel that urgency and use it to invest in the work, because right now it is more of a kind of structure building and piloting to really, identify, support, and develop a relatively small number of an initial cohort, of 5 schools, given that there's almost 200 schools in San Diego, unified alone. But that, in spite of the fact that when you really look at successful community schools, there's almost something unremarkable about what they're doing, where you ask yourself, wait, I thought, isn't that just how all schools should run? All schools should be connected to their community, should have the type of high quality teaching and powerful, culturally relevant curriculum that Chris was talking about. But the fact of the matter is, right, there's dominant culture, there's the way institutions and systems are, and it's difficult to change them overnight. And so there's kind of a go slow to go fast approach, deep organizing, really find and support an initial cohort so that success, that model can kind of serve as a foundation to build. You can't build walls and a roof if you don't have a strong foundation first, and that's kind of the theory of action right now behind the approach that the coalition and Alexandra and Alliance and community partners across San Diego are taking.
I wanted to take a stab at it. That was okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. So like Chris said, the ideal vision is that every school could eventually become a community school and could obviously receive the lessons from the pillars and the mechanisms that are implemented into community schools to better their own existing schools. The only issue and challenge I see with converting all of San Diego Unified's current schools into community schools is that while a lot of these schools are very, very active in their communities, schools like specifically University City are located in an area where they aren't central in their community, which prohibits and limits their exposure to different community members and different community businesses and partnerships and possible opportunities. So while we would obviously love for schools like UC to convert to be a community school, there are limitations and challenges that are prohibiting them from interacting with their community as much as they would like to. And even though these school students are very, very well-versed in their community and they advocate a ton for their community needs, the location itself is probably one of the biggest issues that's going to limit the interaction between community and students.
Thank you so much for adding that. And I think this is a great segue into asking, what are some of the challenges that we foresee with making more community schools? And do we think this model will be welcomed, or do you think people will hesitate? What are some of the challenges that you foresee with this model?
I'll go again. So, like I also said previously, location is definitely a solid and important part that allows the foundation for a community school so we can build upon that. I already addressed what a challenge might be with that, but for other challenges, students converting to a community school type curriculum and system of learning is going to be difficult, because while they were not introduced into the community school program at a younger age, but rather converting when they're in high school or middle school or older ages, it's going to be a completely new way of learning. For me, that was one of my struggles when I started International Baccalaureate in middle school. It was a completely new way of ranking systematic values, as well as reflecting upon certain global issues that I had never previously experienced in my education. And so while community schools obviously offers a lot of great insight into community needs, it's going to be hard for students to adjust, but I don't think that makes it impossible. And in fact, I think that makes it a challenge that we are able to overcome and that we need to overcome, because I feel like students do need to have an interaction with their community and to provide bigger community sense, so that when they graduate college and when they earn their degree, when they come back to a community that they find home, they then know how to address the needs of community and to contribute to those needs.
Love that. Thank you so much. And from Jonathan or from Chris, do you have anything that you'd like to add to this as well?
Yeah, I think there are challenges. The implementation of a community, the transition or conversion of a school to a community school is not a zero cost affair. The implementation of community schools does, add to the bottom line of operating the school. Once it is established, however, it can be run more efficiently than a district public school. And I think that it will present a challenge to the charter school industry. And we know that the Charter School Association is not in favor of community schools. They launch fights across the United States daily to prevent schools from converting to community schools. And then I also think there's some internal challenges, in the education community. People don't understand collaborative leadership, and so I'm trying to be politically sensitive here, but it's difficult. The Principals or Administrators Association has a problem with collaborative leadership in schools with community members, parents, and stakeholders. And so, yes, there will be opposition to a large-scale conversion of community schools. There was opposition to the work that we were doing to get San Diego Unified to implement 3 to 5 community schools. I think what people have to understand is that the model as it is has not worked for the students with the most need, has not worked for the communities with the least resources, has not worked for the traditionally, historically marginalized communities that depend on education to lift them out of poverty. And at the end of the day, someone's poverty over here benefits someone's wealth and achievement on the other side. And so as long as people see the education system as a system with finite resources, there will be a fight for how those resources are spent and who they go to. And when you start talking about equity and equitable outcomes and equitable resource distribution, that always creates a fight for the haves. They see their ability to thrive challenged. I don't agree, but that is the nature of the beast. And so I think, the success of community schools won't be enough to get people to buy into the concept and the conversion of other schools to community schools.
Yeah.
Yeah, ditto to everything that Chris and Alexandra were sharing. And dominant culture is powerful and it's hard to change. And even in schools that are, perceived as highly effective and successful, who thrive within kind of the dominant sort of high stakes testing paradigm, if I'm perceived as successful, then I might also have my own barriers to like real inclusive leadership and bottom up decision making, collaboration with community, those sort of invisible walls that are at the core of that feedback that folks who are doing those curbside conversations kept getting back. There's great diversity of like resources and opinion and people within our community, and yet in every curbside conversation, in almost every curbside conversation, as Chris shared earlier, there was an expression of not feeling welcome. And it's not just from parents, it's also from some of those resources in the community. And I think one thing that ultimately will break down those walls and barriers and create the type of experience that really can change dominant culture is and one beautiful thing about community schools is you do this needs assessment, but you also do this recognition and analysis of assets of the things that exist in the community that just haven't been able to be connected or get into the schools. And that's one of the ways in which they are showing themselves every day in communities that have quite different from each other to be powerful, transformative, positive places for learning and teaching and health and well-being. And, you know, you've got to feel some of that to, you know, to know that there's a different possibility out there than the thing that we've been doing that is so powerful and so dominant right now within our institution.
Thank you so much. And all of this is really, I feel like, coming together for me as I'm listening to all of you speak. Thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise. And I feel like this leads me to wonder, you know, I'm hearing one of the ways that we can advocate for community schools is getting more funding for schools. But what are some other things that we can do to help advocate for more community schools?
I think one thing here in San Diego is to really, Chris talked about, you know, board members change, superintendents change, you know, politics changes, but for the commitment to this work on the part of the coalition to sort of ignore all that and keep driving the program, because even though, again, 5 is a small number, when you know, you can think of 5 as a small number, but the experiences of those 5 schools, the data and the knowledge that'll be gained and gleaned from them, you know, will be incredibly powerful. It's a long-winded way of saying, I think the best way to advocate for the resources we need for community schools is to effectively use the resources we have right now in these pilots, and to show that they are powerful and transformative and that they work. Sort of, if you build it, the resources will come.
Do you have
I
something
think
you'd like to
I just want to say, you know, San Diego Unified School District will be implementing 3 to 5 schools starting school year 2022. You don't have to be a parent to be involved in a school. You don't have to have a student at a school to be involved at a school. Those who want to advocate for community schools should partner with schools that will be selected to become community schools in San Diego Unified. And then from there, advocate, you know, for this model to be implemented at more schools, you know, or across the board, or whatever your flavor is. But you must, you know, get to see it up close so your advocacy can be real. And there's no limit to how people can be involved at community schools.
I love that. Thank you. And Alex, did you have anything that you wanted to jump in on from a student perspective, if there's anything that we can do for students or broadly like to add?
Well, from a student perspective, one of the things that I've learned in my short time in high school is that when students make noise, the district listens. And so student advocacy is probably one of the biggest game changers when it comes to district policy, district mandated programs, and district issues in general. We have site governance teams on each of the San Diego Unified School campuses, I believe. I have friends on our site governance team at San Diego High, and the main thing that I hear from them is how are we able to implement access and make known the resources that we have available to our students. And so when I hear things like that, and then I find a program like community schools, I try and tell as many students as I can about it, because when students rally together, and especially parents too, if parents are able to vouch for students, back up students, and also to provide evidence that students may not have access to or might not think of as to why community schools is a beneficial program, then that can also help improve student voice, and to say that we do need community schools because it provides us with opportunities and resources that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
And I have one more question for y'all before we turn it over. But do we have any examples of tangible things that you've seen, that you've experienced, as to how community schools have benefited either you or other people in your life?
Well, I gave the example growing up that my school was a community school. Now the pillars and those things existed, but not as a theoretical perspective, it existed because it needed to, because I grew up in the inner city of Detroit, poor neighborhoods. And the focus on the whole child was just starting. My mom was an organizer in the public school system. And so I got to see from the inside that my school was a community school. We in doing this work of advocating for community schools, we've looked at schools across the country. I attended a community school institute in Milwaukee, where they used case studies and interviews, and they had community school leaders and parents and students come in and talk to us. And so while I haven't seen a community school operate, from a deep perspective, I've been in contact and communication with people running community schools. I've been in contact with students who are graduates of community schools. And I've talked to parents, and across the board, folks have said that the community school changed their view of education in their community. It changed the outcome for their students and their children in their community. It's hard for me to put into words the needs that we have in San Diego Unified School District for the students who are not getting positive outcomes. I can't even put into words how high that need is. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting it to work. It's not working. We have to change something. This is an opportunity to employ a model that has worked across the country, and you have to employ it in the way that is successful. Some community schools fail. The schools that fail are the schools that didn't utilize all of the learning and all of the case studies and the successful models that have come from the successful community schools. There are schools that didn't adhere to 6 pillars. There are schools that didn't truly build collaborative leadership. There are schools that didn't truly welcome parents and stakeholders into the school system. It's one thing to have somebody in the building, but can they come to a meeting? Can they talk about the curriculum? Can they give a note to the teacher that says, I think this might be fill in the blank? Will the teachers accept that? Will the principals make space? Do the site governance team truly build collaborative leadership and include all community stakeholders? Those are the things that make them successful. And if schools don't buy into that, you can put whatever name you want on it, and the failure will still be the same.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And Jonathan, did you have something that you'd like to add?
Yeah, a perspective I can share, again, mindful that I'm not an educator in the classroom, is that, in certainly for years now, working with educators directly, parents and community in our schools, and hopefully I don't nerd out too hard here, but for me, it's a little bit like Voltron, which is one of my all-time favorite cartoons. So you've got these amazing robot cats that form together in the super powerful warrior robot. And what I've seen are a lot of cats. So we have schools that have, very collaborative and inclusive leadership, but don't have community resources that are connected to the school. We have schools that have, truly unbelievable, organizers who are, I would say in some cases, leading the entire national discussion around culturally relevant curriculum, but don't have the inclusive leadership. And so we've got like these powerful disparate elements, but what we haven't yet seen and experimented with here in San Diego, although as Chris said, we've seen a lot of research, talked to a lot of people, parents, family, community, administrators in LA, Cincinnati, Boston, Texas, Kentucky, is that unified theory of action here in San Diego, adherence to all the pillars, the again, kind of unremarkable and yet completely transformative role of the community schools coordinator. And so that's the thing that I think the coalition is so excited about, is really testing the theory here in our schools, our communities, our neighborhoods, because we have a lot of data. We have a lot of the cats, but they haven't come together yet to form that all-powerful Voltron. I appreciate everyone's willingness to let me really nerd out a little.
We love Voltron over here. I can only speak for myself personally, but we love Voltron. We love the reboot. Yeah, Voltron lives. Chris is on the Voltron train. We're here. Watch, this is going to be in the rest of the community schools conversation moving forward. They're going to be like, we have a lot of cats, but we don't have full integration of our 6 cats. We need them all together. Well, thank you all so much for your expertise and for all of the work that you are doing to get community schools in San Diego and for leading the fight in that. I'm going to pop it back over to Maisha to lead the second portion of this so we can hear from our community members who have joined us today and answer some more of our questions that folks might have.
Cool. We have some questions typed in the chat. I'll read the first one and then I'll ask Danelle to unmute. She had her hand raised, so I'll give her a chance to speak in just a second. But the question that was typed was, are there schools that are implementing community school programs or taking steps towards this model? And I think I kind of had the same question. I wrote it down here. Was there a strategy for implementation? What that strategy actually is? What is it going to look like in the next couple of months? If you can share, we'd love to hear.
I feel extremely qualified to answer this question because we had the first Community Schools Advisory Committee meeting today, which is the second phase of implementation in the San Diego Unified School District. Alex told you that she sat on the Community Schools Implementation Team, which was the precursor to the CSAC, the Community Schools Advisory Committee. And so we are moving forward. We actually have an application. We have an application process. The Community Schools Advisory Committee's role is to select up to 5 schools that will convert between now and next September to community schools in San Diego Unified School District. We have the funding allocated. We have the board of the trustees are on board and in full support. The San Diego Education Association is on board and in full support. And the San Diego Unified School District is on board and in full support. And so, yes, we will be moving up to 5 schools to a community schools model, starting with the selection process in January. That process will be completed by spring. Schools must apply and create a package that will be evaluated, competitively. And then up to 5 schools will be selected. They'll be notified in summer, early summer, and start the process. And we also have the funding to hire community school site coordinators, which are an integral part of the successful implementation. These are professionals whose job will be to ensure adherence to the pillars, to ensure collaborative leadership, to ensure that community stakeholders are invited to be a part of the process, and will share leadership at the school site with the principal. And so we're excited because I can tell you after, I think I stepped into this in 2010 with SDEA and the district to advocate for community schools. And over the course of, I think, 5 superintendents and many more board members, we're finally here. And so we are excited and chomping at the bit to get this done.
That's amazing. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Yay. I'm sorry. I'm going to pop it back to Maisha. I'm no longer moderating. I just wanted to express how excited I am about this.
That's exciting. It's very exciting.
One thing to Chris's comment, I believe the official title is supposed to be the Community Schools Piloting Program, and those are going to be the 5 schools that will be converted. So if any of you are wanting to keep track of community schools progress and you hear piloting program, that is what they're specifically referencing as those 5 schools becoming the precedent of the new community schools program.
Thank you. Wow, it looks like everything's been moving. I kept saying, like, when we were building this think table, like, I feel like no one knows what's happening and something great is about to happen. Why don't people know that this is happening? So is this supposed to be moving in stealth right now? Or is it just ignorance? I don't know.
I mean, I think it's part of it is certainly that. So, if you're involved in the organizations that are part of the coalition, if you're involved in your own local Sunday Unified School, whether, SSC or SGT, or just kind of, generally involved parent or staff member, you probably have some level of awareness. And I hope this doesn't sound like an excuse in any way, shape, or form, but certainly the pandemic created some challenges in terms of just capacity and energy and time. But I think one beautiful thing about what Chris just reminded us to is that in spite of that, the commitment to the work, the excitement around the vision, I don't think, in spite of the pandemic, I can't think of a coalition meeting or that didn't happen, or a major delay that waylaid any of this work, in spite of how challenging this last year and a half has been for communities, for families, for parents, for students, and for educators. And so, but I do think that also probably speaks to the need for more, shared communications and awareness on the part of Sunday Unified. And but hopefully but I do think definitely the schools that are, whose SGTs are interrogating the question and the work and the theory of action. They're signing up for trainings and for help in the application process. It's really exciting to me. And but I think, there's definitely some more awareness would be helpful. And Chris just put a sign up for a newsletter in the chat box. So there's part of the answer right there. Sign up.
Right. And to add on to what Jonathan was saying, one of the biggest gaps that we have come to realize within the district is communication. And so unfortunately, while there are many, many programs that are underway and in progress under district review, a lot of them have not been advertised, and a lot of them have not been made aware of by students, teachers, and faculty. We've learned that through SWARE. Also, some of our SWARE representatives are happily serving on the youth advisory board for community schools now. So they will be helping out with the mental health perspective on that. But the biggest issue is the communication between the district, the resources, and the programs. And so unfortunately, it is not complete ignorance, but it is lack of communication and lack of marketing these programs, which has been one of the biggest faults that we have seen from the district, unfortunately, is that these programs do exist and the help is there. Just no one knows how to find that help because it is not accurately communicated. For community schools, hopefully we will be seeing more progress made in the near future. The Youth Advisory Board just met tonight, so hopefully they will be receiving updates and providing the vast majority of the San Diego Unified School District with more information to come. Other than that, all I can say is that the information coming from community schools will probably have big gaps in it. And most of the time, the big achievements are what we're going to see rather than the actual process, which is really unfortunate because the process really shows us what is being done, what is being valued, and what kind of support they are receiving from students, parents, staff, and community members. But unfortunately, my prediction is that we will be seeing the outcome and the results before we are actually seeing how it was done. So hopefully, I would hope that the community and the schools that are involved would be able to reach out to the people involved and the people who will be attending community schools to update them on the progress of community schools. But as we've seen from the district, that is not the strongest factor of their operation. So unfortunately, all we can do is hope for the best in terms of communicating the steps and processes of community schools.
Thank you, Alex. I have a question from Karen. What support will the pilot community schools receive if Karen, would you want to unmute yourself and clarify? But I'm guessing, is this financial support that you're asking?
Oh, sorry. I was having
No.
trouble unmuting. Yeah, I was just, thank you for inviting me to this meeting, by the way. And it's really interesting and exciting. I was just wondering, sort of at the front end, are there incentives, or is there some way that the committee is reaching out to schools to encourage them to apply? And then also, the schools who do get the community school designation, are there, financial? I know you mentioned that there would be a person on site to help with the shared leadership, but will there be other sort of resources offered to those schools?
Yes, the district has made a full commitment, which includes resources, staffing. The district recently hired a community schools coordinator who will be responsible for ensuring that the supports are in place from the district to the schools. They will also oversee the implementation at each of the schools that are selected, make sure things are going according to the process and design. And they will have a direct line, well, almost a direct line to the superintendent. That was our request, is that they be able to talk to the superintendent. Of course, there'll be somebody supervising them, but we wanted to make sure that, this was implemented with the smallest amount of bureaucracy possible, because we know that that's another way that people kill our programs, is through the bureaucratic process. Well, the check was slow or the process was slow. Another way for folks to, because the question I think was around support, another way for folks to support is, again, to get involved with the schools that are selected. And I put a link to the Community Schools Advisory Committee website on the board site or on the district site. That's a place where you can stay up to date. Our minutes, our agendas, and other information will be located there. But yeah, the support will be, well, I've been told that there will be no lack of support for the community school implementation. If there's a problem, an issue that the district, and I have to say the district has acted honorably so far. Nothing is easy in a district the size of San Diego Unified, but the district has made a commitment and has followed through on its commitments so far. And I would anticipate that they continue following through on their commitment, because we have Jonathan Mello on our side.
Which is another way to say, actually, I think Alexandra put it most brilliantly, which is, if the district plays around, some folks are going to make some noise. Students, parents, community, and educators. But I also, in all fairness, like Chris said, there's and actually I don't want to give credit to actual individual board members or even the superintendent. I think the credit is actually should go to the coalition, who did the work, the deep organizing of building support through engagement and awareness and education and relationship. And so as you're doing that, as you're building that support, you're also making it clear to folks that that there's going to be some noise if, like Chris said, if the institution and the bureaucracy, if things get in the way. As we all know, as folks who work within and around schools know, someone somewhere is going to come up with a new big idea. And that person has probably never taught in a school, or maybe even never gone to a public school. They might come from DC, they might come from some office in the state. And those new big ideas, those newfangled initiatives can't, overshadow or push aside this bottom up deep organizing that's happening within and around our schools. And if it does, then again, as Alexandra Mondragon, big fan of Voltron, said, we're going to make some noise.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Danelle. She's been patiently waiting to unmute and share. And then Sam, I will get your question.
Hello, everyone. What a great conversation. I apologize earlier. I didn't realize the format, and I loved just hearing and listening to what's going on in San Diego City Schools and realizing that I am privileged to be able to work with a school that is intentionally a community school right now. And that's the Monarch School. That's the K through 12 school in downtown, dedicated to educating unsheltered and kids and families without homes. And they have, as I listen to the pillars that you talk about and the commitment, the wraparound services, access to superintendent resources and encouragement, they're a quiet little special place that have put all those pieces together. The social emotional, the services to families, the inclusive leadership. You might wonder then, why do they need an outside consultant right now? It is hard. The academics are provided by the county Board of Education teachers, and the wraparound services are provided by a very well-funded nonprofit staff. And sometimes those are up against each other hard. So they are eager to share what they're doing and what they know. And so if in the schools that you're working with, they're interested in talking to counterparts that are trying to live that now, I would encourage thinking about Monarch. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you so much, Danelle. I have a question from Patty before I answer Sam's question. Patty asked.
Maisha, can I comment? Because I appreciate everything that Danelle shared. And I think Monarch is doing a great job. I really do believe in Monarch's model and in what they're doing. However, they are not a community school. By the definition of community school that we're working with, they have not implemented the 6 pillars, and that is, across the country, the distinction between community schools, charter schools, and public schools. And if I'm not mistaken, Monarch is a charter school, which is fine. I'm not anti-charter school. I just want to make the distinction that they are a charter school who operates with great care, concern, and involvement of the community and in the best interest of the community. And they do a really good job. So this is not besmirching Monarch at all, but they would not be called a community school.
Thank you. I think we're all going to have to keep getting information and knowledge on how to distinctively label the schools. Because I mean, I guess from listening to it sounded as if it fit those things. And so how does the school actually get that label? I guess over time we'll have all the criteria and the accurate labels for schools that are community schools. Patty's question is, we know that San Diego Unified is hiring a new superintendent. Do you know if experience, knowledge, support for community schools is part of the criteria that they are looking at?
I love
Do you
you.
have anyone on the superintendent search committee?
Chris runs it.
I have enjoyed the experience of being on the superintendent search committee. The criteria developed for this search and for the candidate screening process did include familiarity and experience with community schools, and that was publicly released, so I can say that. I can't talk about the candidates that were in the pool or the applicants who submitted resumes. I can't, but I can tell you that a focus on community schools was in the criteria for the search.
Well put. Um, I'm going to go ahead and have Sam ask his question. I'm asking you to unmute, Sam.
Yes, can you hear me? Great. Thank you so much, everybody. What a wonderful discussion. And I have a question regarding the effect of community schools on racial integration. I grew up going to a public school in an urban district in the East Coast. And in the early years, most of my peers have been students of color. My teachers were people of color until I got into a high school that was a magnet school, that was an exam school. And then all of a sudden, all of the students are white and most of the teachers are white. And then fast forward to today, where I have young children here enrolled in San Diego Unified, and two of my kids are now in a immersion school, a language immersion school. And there's a certain cachet to that. And I noticed there's a lot more racial diversity, and that probably is because it's 2021 Southern California versus, 1990s Boston. But there is, I feel like, a lot more folks from around the different districts, different part of the district that are coming together in this one school and investing in it because they believe in a model of dual immersion. So do you see community schools as a vehicle for essentially reintegrating folks in communities, whether that's racially or socioeconomically? Is that a potential for that model? And then a second part of my question, which is more technical, is can a school be kind of have multiple distinctions? Can a school be a community school and an IB school and a dual immersion school all at the same time?
The second part of the question, I think yes, that's quite possible. The first part of the question is more complicated because I'm not sure I understand what you mean by can community schools become a vehicle for integration, and that I'm kind of triggered by that word used in education because I personally think integration did a lot of damage to communities of color, to urban communities. But I want to understand what you mean by them being used as a vehicle for integration.
Yeah, I guess I personally have negative experiences of, especially in the East Coast, forced integration, right? That was a big fight in many local districts. But what I mean is more organic, like just people realizing that they need to understand by coming together, resources can be shared, and the effect of primarily white families that, for whatever reason, the trend is still that they enroll their kids in less schools with less people of color, for whatever reason. Even if they believe in public education, those are still the trends. But I might be a little bit ignorant in terms of like the actual statistics in San Diego, still being new here, especially as a parent of young kids. But I think that's where I'm getting at in terms of integration, is just communities coming together. Because I think normally, if I was going to enroll my kids in my neighborhood school, I would see way less Asian kids than right now being in a Chinese immersion school, where I see a lot more Asian parents and families. So that's what I mean by kind of integration, in the sense that it's more organic. People are actually coming together and not afraid of diversity.
I'm not sure this is going to answer your question. I mean, my hope is that the community schools will be a reflection of the communities that they're in. And at the beginning of this conversation, we said that community schools would accept students, period, full stop. There wouldn't be some sort of selection process. There wouldn't be application process. There wouldn't be a way to weed out or cherry pick students at a successful community school. And so I don't think of reflecting the community as integration. I think reflecting the community is the highest form of diversity, of inclusion.
But if you're reflecting the community, the default of many communities is segregation because of residential segregation as a default, right? We live in very segregated communities. So if your school is reflecting a community, it may not be as diverse as you would hope a school should be. Because even if you're not discriminating and you're accepting everybody, there's still a lot of people who are self-selecting themselves out of that, you know, by going to charter schools, by going to private schools, or so then is there a opposite effect of attracting everybody to a community school?
I'm not sure what you mean by everybody.
Everybody in whatever, I guess I'm still unclear about the geography of the community schools. So for these ones, let's say for SD Unified, they are selected right now to be pilots to convert to community schools. Are they mostly enrolling families that are living in the geographical proximity to the actual school? Or is it
we haven't started it yet, Sam. So it's hard to say what they're doing because they're not doing anything because we haven't even opened the applications yet. But I think if I get the gist of your question, the schools that will be selected will be schools in the most high need neighborhoods of San Diego. And, you know, those schools are in diverse neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods are the most diverse neighborhoods in the city of San Diego. So that's what I mean by they will reflect the diversity of the community they're in, because those communities with the most high need students are in the most diverse communities in the city.
I actually kind of feeling Sam's question. So can we do an example? Like if Gage Elementary is selected to be a community school, all the kids there will automatically be a part of this piloting strategy, or will other kids be able to come and be a part of this? Well, you don't know that. It's still a question mark.
It's a question mark because San Diego is an open enrollment district, meaning there's no boundaries. You can go to any school you want to go to. So until a school reaches its max enrollment, they accept students. Gage would not qualify for community schools because it's not in a high need neighborhood. And so I think that is the first filter, is that the high need neighborhoods have already been identified. And they're identified based on, you know, a lot of different demographics and other contributing factors. And they're not determined by the CSAC, the Community Schools Advisory Committee, they're determined by the school district. And so that already limits who can apply and what neighborhoods will be affected. But because of San Diego's open boundary enrollment, you know, if a student shows up to enroll, you know, I think it'd be hard for a community school to turn away a student, regardless of their background. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Sam?
Yeah, I'm definitely beginning to understand a little bit more. I guess, I don't know, I hate to center like white families and white people, but it's always part of the equation in terms of like, where would these people make their decisions in terms of enrollment? And I think part of, I guess, my limited understanding of it is that a lot of it is driven by residential segregation and where people choose to live. And then even if they are living in a district that's unified and then go with different boundaries, they still would choose the schools that are more white. And then when you say more diverse and high need, that those are code words for white people to say, well, I don't want to put my kids in that, you know, school that has a lot of people of color, until they see the results, right? So until they see what you told us for the last hour, which is the evidence is showing that, look, this is working because the previous model is not working. This is working, and potentially this could be a place where more people would just opt in just by the sheer evidence of that these are schools, are quality schools. But I'm still kind of trying to just disentangle like the relationship between schooling and local taxes and residential segregation. And then also to Alexandra's point earlier about University City, is there a way in the future for community school to also drive conversations about planning? So, maybe we could even rethink how we plan neighborhoods, how we even physically build things so that the school is actually at the physical center of a particular neighborhood or community because we value it, and we don't want to put it in the periphery. We don't want to put it in the most convenient driving distance to upper middle class families. We just want it to be the most convenient, most accessible with public transit, with parks, libraries, everything within walking distance. Is that also something that community schools can drive in terms of larger conversations about our built environment and where our communities are actually situated?
I would definitely hope that after community schools has been fully implemented and after the piloting program has reached a grounding point to where it is here to stay and will gain influence within the district, I would hope that they would talk about city planning and when they're considering to either build, construct, or make new community schools, to definitely localize and centralize that school in the community. I used UC as an example because I recently went to a program about city and urban planning, and it demonstrated how UC is on this one singular road that is more like a mini highway on the side of this giant hill. And the community is on the other side of this giant hill. And unfortunately, that limits public transportation and accessibility to the school through the community. So I would hope that once community schools gains more influence and it has gotten off its feet as a new and very, very young program, that it would have the influence and the ability to create those conversations about city planning. Because I think that the city planning, especially in accordance to community schools, is really going to determine the influence and the structure as well as the relationship that that school will have with the community. So I really like that point, Sam. Thank you for bringing that up. I really, really hope that is something that they can work towards and hopefully further introduce into the school system. That would be a great thing for them to do. Thank you.
All right. I think we have reached our mark. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Before I have people hopping off, I would like to thank you all for being here. This was a great discussion. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Jonathan, Alex, Chris, and thank you, Farah, for moderating. Alliance San Diego will be completely giving updates. So like Chris said, you can sign up for our newsletter at alliancesandiego.org. And please be on the lookout for any other Think Table events where you can support and follow Alliance San Diego. Have a good night. We will post this recording on our social media. So if you would like other people to hear and catch up on what we talked about tonight, please share or tag them on Facebook. Have a good night.
Thank you for joining, everybody. Great discussion, great questions. Appreciate all the input and feedback. Thank you, Alex, Jonathan.
Thank you for
Farah,
having me, Alliance. It's a
Maisha.
pleasure as always.
Yes.
Great discussion.